Wonder about the future and how you'll be working and learning? Welcome to You in 2042, the future of work, with your host, Danielle Wallace.
Hello and welcome to You in 2042, the future of work. Joining me today is Stephen Ibaraki. Stephen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, first of all, Danielle, thank you for inviting me. I think it's outstanding, the work you're doing. It's amazing, all the contributions you're making globally. So again, kudos to you for everything you're doing across so many different dimensions. Now, in terms of your question, what I do a lot. So I'll just kind of summarize. I work daily across communities of over 1 million CEOs, investors, scientists, and experts across the UN, CEO communities, academic communities, and government communities and so on. This is kind of generalized. If you wanted to find out more, people should just search for me on the internet and you'll see all sorts of videos or things that I do.
Amazing. And I'm so glad and privileged to be able to have you on our podcast. I know you've been around the world globally in Africa, Europe, America, and more, doing various keynotes. And we're just thrilled you could share some of your insights with our listeners. On that note, many of our listeners are really interested in thinking about the future of work and what that might end up looking like, given all the multiple impacts that we have on our society. Any thoughts on those impacts and their effect on the workplace?
So that's a really good question in terms of the context of work, the future work, and the impact that's going to have of all of the convergences that are happening, right? So we did an earlier podcast, I believe, something like May of 2021, where we talked somewhat similar. But to update from that, then there's this really double exponential convergence of the digital, the biological, and the physical. And this convergence is double exponential, meaning that there's more change occurring now in the last 10 years than I would say in the last 2 million years. And that's going to have profound effect about how governments operate, how businesses and industry and people. It's going to affect society, education, every aspect of our lives. It's going to change in dramatic ways. So let me add a little bit more of that background, and then we'll talk about the impact on work, right? So what are these convergences? Supercomputing. Supercomputing has now hit exascale. It could do a billion operations per second. So what does that mean? That means I can model things like climate. I can model things like new kinds of semiconductors or pharmaceuticals, healthcare. I can even simulate the planet in these new kind of computers. So that's going to have a profound impact. In fact, there's a new computer coming up this year in 2024, where they're going to be able to actually model the entire human brain with somewhere between 80 to 100 billion neurons and the 100 trillion synapses. So they're going to be able to model that. So there's that whole aspect of supercomputing combined with analog computing, which is rising. There's also quantum computing, and quantum computing is already solving unique kind of problems already commercially and in science. So quantum computing is kind of using the whole field of quantum science and being able to solve computational problems doing this. So what I mean by that, again, it's in healthcare, nature, climate, new kinds of energy, batteries, and so on. And problems that were considered impossible before, let's say it would have taken a million years, and a quantum computer can solve in maybe 2 days or something like that, or a month, right? And there's hybrid configurations of combining supercomputers with quantum computers. So that's two aspects. There's another convergence happening, and that's in semiconductors. Those are the chip technologies that you're seeing out there. A good example, you may have seen Jensen Huang, the founder and CEO of NVIDIA. NVIDIA has gone from really nowhere to now being over $2 trillion in value, and it's kind of powering all of these revolutions that are occurring. Well, those chips are undergoing a revolution. For example, there's a new kind of chips called carbon nanotube. They're producing them now. They can be much more efficient, draw less power. There's chips using what we call 3D architectures, again, much more efficient, drawing less power. New kind of chips that operate like the brain. They're neuromorphic chips, again, consume much less power. They're even inserting chips, right, human cells, water, human cells, even maybe alters behavior in a positive way. So there's a huge amount of work being in semiconductor technologies. We talked about computing, exascale supercomputing to quantum computing to analog computing that's kind of mixed in there, and quantum computing. And they're producing hybrid services that are available in the cloud, on the internet, where you could get a mix of these services working together. And then we talked about semiconductors as kind of the underlying chip technology that's driving all of this. For example, my phone has an A17 bionic chip that can do 33 trillion operations per second. It's like a supercomputer in your hand, right?
Wow.
So that's all on the chip side. And then there's all sorts of biomedical innovation that's occurring simultaneously. So what do I mean by that? So there's biomedical innovation. So I can grow meat in a bioreactor. I don't have to have cattle. I can actually grow it. So you don't have all of the climate impacts of climate, raising animals or some of the other concerns that are raising animals, right? Biomedical innovation means that new kinds of treatment for diseases or diagnosing diseases and so on are through biomedical innovation and using nanotechnologies. Biomedical innovation, if you look at David Sinclair and the work he's doing at Harvard, where using these special factors called Yamanaka factors, maybe you can create a system, a regimen where people could live many years, perhaps even live forever. I mean, that's now within the realm of possibility, right? And that's not in 100 years. I'm talking in the near term. So there's all sorts of biomedical innovation occurring. Another kind of biomedical innovation is you've seen Elon Musk now doing trials with people. And he seen recently where this gentleman was controlling a chess game through a brain implant, right? Or there's other kinds of biomedical innovation through non-invasive techniques. Maybe you can treat cancer through ultrasound, causing the cancer to disappear without doing anything invasive, meaning entering the body or detecting strokes in real time. There's a company called Open Water working in that area. So again, just amazing sort of things that are occurring. And then, of course, in AI machine learning. You saw the work that was done where OpenAI released their chat agent back in the fall of 2022, and it kind of ended the world, right? And then it continued to escalate in 2023. And now you've seen in 2024, OpenAI released Sora, this thing that could generate videos. I mean, can you imagine that? There's another one called Suno.ai that can actually write music. It can actually generate the lyrics, the music, the singer's voice, all through AI, right? And you've seen Microsoft embed this through their Azure OpenAI platform for anybody out there. Microsoft is now releasing their GPT Builder and their Copilot series. So Copilots are things that can work when you're doing search, and it's available for Microsoft. It's for free. They have this Copilot that you can use in a Word or PowerPoint. It can actually create your PowerPoint presentation for you without you even having to create it, right? Do the graphics and so. But it's integrated into all their Office products. But they've created all of this infrastructure for it so that companies can use it, or even individuals can use, creators can use it. You have something called Microsoft Designer, you can create graphics. So, and with GPT-5 coming out this year, in 2024, that's again a huge step in capability. There's already experiments where they're looking at where it can do planning. They can do things like it has memory, so it remembers, just like a human can remember. There's work being done where it can self-reflect, just like if I give you a problem, sometimes you'll think about the problem and then you'll cogitate on it. And that's sort of reflecting on that problem. And then you'll give some kind of reasoned answer. So that capability is also being worked on, right? So the feeling is, and my feeling is that there's kind of two ways you can test for artificial general intelligence. There's kind of measuring against the yardstick of what a human can do. But that's a difficult yardstick because we don't really know what a human does. We know some parts of what we consider a human does. We don't understand all of it. But there's another part, artificial general intelligence, is that all of the known testing that's out there, that we do know. We do know how it works. We know how humans actually measure against all of the available tests that are out there and new ones that are being created. And then we can actually apply this new AI machine learning ChatGPT kind of models that are all co-pilots against it to see how well it does, right? And it does fairly well against the majority of them. But in a few years, let's say 3 years, I believe it will be to surpass humans on all of them, right? Or 3 to 5 years anyways, right? In fact, Jensen Huang just this past week has indicated he figures maybe in 5 years it can basically do what humans can do across all of these testing deterministic things that we can actually measure and we're not guessing. And there's a lot of work in embodiment of robots, right? So I just did a fireside chat with Kozlai, a serial entrepreneur, a really famous entrepreneur, one of the top investors in the world. In fact, he invested in OpenAI in 2019. So we even one of the first investors in there. And in my fireside chat, where we had a free-form conversation, he felt this embodiment of robots is a big deal. And it's going to happen. There's going to be billion of these robots. So what do we mean by embodiment of robots? So why don't we take all of this AI machine learning work and put it into robots that look like us, but robots that don't look like us. But especially on the robots that look like us, that means that you could have a caretaker in a home, or you could have an assistant working with you that you could engage with it. And you've seen OpenAI release this video on this investment they made in this figure one robotics company, where the gentleman is just interacting with the robot in real time, asking it questions, and the robot is responding in real time without having to be pre-trained, right? So that means the reality of having a robot that works with you and you don't have to train, but learns on its own and can learn by observation and so on is a reality in the next few years. So what are the implications of that, right? So now we talked about all of these convergences happening. We talked about from supercomputers to quantum computers to chip technologies to biomedical innovation, and then into AI machine learning and these new large language models and the implications of what they can do to their embodiment in robots. And if you look back a couple of weeks ago, a really famous researcher by the name of Jeremy Hinton did a talk at Oxford, and he's saying, you know what, there's more going on. And he's saying that maybe there's some understanding that's happening. So it's more than just being this kind of probabilistic parrot predicting the next word. There's some understanding occurring, some kind of world model, world view happening in these things. There was a paper released or some work that was released sort of into the press about a month ago in random graph theory, also suggesting that there's understanding occurring. And the more parameters you have, the more kind of capabilities these things have, where you've gone from hundreds of billion parameters, kind of a measure of its capability, to 500 billion to now 1.75 trillion to now it's in the trillions. Then the capabilities are even becoming much more. Then you're getting this more human-like capabilities. I'm not saying it's human, but I'm saying that it can do things that humans can do, right? And keep in mind, there's even work being done in interspecies communication. So they're trying to apply it to see if these kind of systems can be trained to understand whales are saying, or even what bees are they communicating in some kind of language. And maybe this can act as an interpreter. Maybe your pet, when it meows to you, a cat or a dog is barking at you, and its behaviors, this system can be trained to act as a translator. So there could be interspecies communication, right? Or communication occurring from brain signals, like all of these brain-computer interfaces, but use an AI machine learning interface with it, where it can translate your thinking into communication in some way. Well, can you imagine if you could do that with other species as well? So there's this convergence occurring. So now that's the context of the world we live in, right? But in the near term, the 3 to 5 years, what is that going to mean, the future of work? So the whole definition of work will change. The whole meaning of work will change. The whole meaning of society will change. The whole meaning of education will change. The whole meaning of what it means to work will change, because all of these will have dramatic impacts in the world today, right? It used to be that people used to really emphasize take coding. These things like Microsoft's Copilot and GitHub is an open platform for coders. There's an assistant in there that can code. And still humans are better coders, but it could do a pretty good job, right? And this stuff is just getting better. So it'll change the meaning of what it means to code, right? You'll be more of a designer, perhaps, but even in the design, it's going to help you. So keep in mind with GPT-5 and this next version that you come at GPT-6, it'll be able to do things autonomously. In other words, you can give it a problem, and then it'll be able to generate other agents that will work on the problem autonomously to drive towards a goal. So you can give it some ultimate destination goal, and then it'll drive automatically and solve that goal. There's agents that could do this, autonomous generators that could do this now, but you still have to have a bit of human intervention. It's going to be less and less of that, right? So what does that mean in terms of the future work? So the definition of future work is going to completely change. There's this idea that the whole world, and Jensen Huang mentioned it in this GTC conference, where everything's kind of based on retrieval right now, retrieving things, but it's moving to generation, right? So our jobs are going to change to generation from retrieval. And the way we interact is going to change because of the generative models that are out there. So what is that going to mean to the creation of movies, or the creation from the creative side of art or photography, or basically anything that's creative, right? How is that going to change our definition of creativity? How is it going to change our definition of doing experiments, modeling? How is it going to change our definition of doing simulations? How is it going to change our definition coming up with really novel things, because all of these technologies are going to be integrated with it. And that turn then will profoundly change the definition of work.
So with that, it's interesting because there's a few things what you said that really resonated. So the human as a yardstick, and what struck me is this is beyond human. These are the capabilities, amalgamating the effects of the supercomputing, semiconducting. These are going beyond what a human can do. And then I imagine this in the workplace becomes something even more than what we can do currently. I'm curious, Stephen, as to thinking about what somebody needs to do in order to know how to do their job, whatever that job might be in the future. I can imagine in this future, well, this near-term future world, even how somebody knows what to do might dramatically change.
Yeah, so there's Gershom and Dyer and Christensen at Harvard, and they produced this article that appeared a number of years ago, The Innovator's DNA. And I'm just going to kind of summarize some of the highlights, but I recommend people go to the original work, and there's books and written on this as well. So, but constantly question the world, question different ways of doing things, ask outlier questions, counterfactual questions, just question things from an entirely different point of view. And in that process, then you're going to be better prepared for the world as it's coming up. So constantly questioning, but not questioning in the traditional sense, but questioning in the kind of the outlier sense, right? And challenging questions, right? The other thing is observing. So don't live a passive life. Live an active life where you're observing different communities, observing all of these elements that are occurring, observing different modalities that you're used to being in, right? So being in and questioning while you're observing and learning. So questioning, observing, experimenting, running experiments. And that experiment could be, I'm going to play another instrument, or I'm going to go to a different conference than I normally go to. Or it could be actually running experiments on something that's job related, right? So you're doing your job, but there's this new kind of thinking that's entering your job. Well, why don't you run an experiment? Try it. Run pilots on it. Experiment. See what happens, right? Learn from those experiments. So question, observing, experimenting, associating. So because you're putting yourself into all these diverse environments, then take some time, and this could be while you're walking or swimming or running, to think about, are there linkages between these diverse areas that seem like they're silos, but really they're not silos. There's connections between them. And that's why if you look at all of the great work that's being done now, it's transdisciplinary. So we've gone from multidisciplinary to interdisciplinary to transdisciplinary, where there's a really tight integration of different schools of thought. So that's the only way you can really solve problems in a meaningful way today, right? So, but associating is part of that. So taking all of these diverse silos and spending some time to think, how are they connected in some way? And then the other one is networking with diverse groups. So there's research to even indicate that the more diverse, open networking that you do, the more innovative you're going to be. And open and diverse groups, meaning now do this in a safe way. So networking in a safe way with other groups who think differently than you and try to understand their way of thinking and try to integrate that into your thing. So question, observing, experiment associated, and networking. And then I think Angela's Duckworth and grit. So, people have skills and then you work really hard and you get talent. And then you take that talent, you work really hard and you get some achievements. But now you combine those achievements with a 720-degree omni-win. So when you're engaging, and this comes from the fifth element group, so try to make sure they win together with you winning. So omni wins, right? But really accelerating that. Being really, really resilient and persevering and being agile. And Jensen Huang in his GTC conference that he just did, he talks about this, being resilient. And you're thinking kind of challenging and resilient. And I believe that having optimism, so working with an optimistic view that you can solve these challenges, but sticking to them. And anytime you come into a challenge, don't think of it as a challenge or something that's you don't want to do. Think of it as an opportunity to learn and to grow. So being into stretch goals, being not the outlier of what you are. So combining those achievements with resilience and agility and hard work and omni wins and stretch goals and working really hard, and then you're going to get success. So if you practice those elements and on a continuing basis, for example, I read maybe 3 to 5 hours a day, but I'm trying to read things that are what's on the outlier, because the outliers are the things that are going to be the mainstream. And that, there's going to be a lot of what I call noise or maybe some nonsense in those outliers. But in those outliers, you're going to find good stuff, right? So how do you ensure that you can weight towards the good stuff rather than noise? Then belong to communities. For example, I'm part of the ACM, the Association of Computing Machinery, definitely the number one computer science organization in the world. And I have leadership roles there. So they curate a lot of that noise into things that are good. I belong to the IEEE, and there's another source of technology engineering innovation in there to get the good stuff where you'll get what's upcoming. And then I read general news. I subscribe to Apple News, and then I just consume all of it until I've gone through every link. And I do this every day. And I'm looking for not the regular stuff that I already know, but that's interesting. They just did a study of people who have phenomenal memories. Yeah, I knew about this before. Then I thought something that was really interesting is they studied their sleep and they find there's more spindles in their sleep. And then they compared that to people who had dementia and they see fewer of these spindles. So maybe there's some kind of correlation there. And then I'm thinking, well, I'm extrapolating that to myself, right? And then maybe there's some useful information in there that can progress that research. So out of this daily reading, as I mentioned about random graph theory, it's a really kind of mature way of analyzing things, right? So I recommend that you try to read things that are on the outlier, but safe stuff. And thereby, that's how you can best prepare yourself. So you definitely have to be agile, resilient, entrepreneurial, focus on the stretch parts, every aspect of your life. And that's the way you can best prepare. And be prepared for rapid transformation that's occurring. So be open to it and to flow with it, not to resist it.
Yeah, that's a great practical advice for our listeners. And I think that also helps set the stage for the workplace in general. We'd love any thoughts you have on that.
I did a keynote for the International Conference of Software Engineering early in 2016. So if you look at that keynote, I predict a lot of things. And if you look at the predictions, you'll find that they have basically come true today. If you search for my profile under IEEE Entrepreneurship, there's a link to that video at this private conference for these CEOs, the top 100 CEOs. Now, keep in mind, at that time, when I was approached in 2015, these CEOs managed 92.7 trillion in assets. That was like 5 times the GDP of the world. So these 100 CEOs controlled more wealth than all the planetary wealth. But this one surviving video, we had a conversation for an hour, but I talk a lot. And if you listen to my talk, it's the world today.
I even found that through our last conversation, there's so many things in our last podcast that you said that 3 years later, I'm like, oh yeah, get it all. It's already happened.
Right.
Pretty amazing to think what is possible. The important thing is actually to imagine the seamless integration of technology into the workforce, into the workflow, that in turn enables more value creation at a higher level, like a higher cognitive level. And then the flip side to that, it really makes it imperative that the workforce overall is agile enough to go with that.
Right. So one of the issues that's happening, because the change is so rapid, is sort of the chaotic things that are happening in society, right? And it's because of this rapid innovation that's occurring. And you have to be resilient to live past this chaotic part of society, because I believe then we'll hit an inflection point, will become much more positive rather than this polarization. I believe that polarization will continue because of this rapid change. So, but you have to be resilient to ride through.
I like that. That's a nice takeaway for everybody is driving and striving for this resiliency to get to that upward inflection point. That really helps poise. Then all of our listeners embrace all these changes that are coming and do so in a way that benefits their organizations and then benefits the society as a whole.
Yes, precisely. And you're part of this because you're getting the message out, right? And you're very much integrated into future work and delivering so much positive value to the communities that you engage with in your company work. So thank you for enabling, this kind of proliferation of different perspectives that are really valuable to the community.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to have you as a guest. Thank you so much for making time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being a part of the future. Subscribe now to stay current.